Hello, all. I appreciate you dropping in to spend the next hour with us. You could be anywhere, so I'm grateful to have your attention. My name is Michael Richardson, Chapter Director here at Startup Grind Birmingham, and I'd like to welcome you all to Beyond the Valley. Before we dive in there, let me give you a little bit more background on Startup Grind. Launched in 2010, Startup Grind is the largest global community of startups, founders, innovators, and creators. We bring like-minded yet diverse individuals together to connect, learn, teach, help, build, and belong. We stand on three core values: give first, make friends, not contacts, and help others before yourself. In addition to chapter membership, there's also startup membership, which is free for accepted startups and gives access to exposure and direct introduction opportunities to top investors and partners, free access to the Startup Summit, which is happening virtually this year via the global conference, a myriad of partner offers valued over $115,000, and a whole lot more. We're also looking for chapter sponsors. So if your brand or company wants to support dope events like this and some other activations, I'd love to have that conversation. I'll drop links for all of this in the chat for anyone who wants to learn more. But back to the topic at hand. For years, or forever it seems, cities like San Francisco, New York, and Boston have held a monopoly of sorts on tech and venture capital. But the tides are changing, and the democratization of tech is something to behold. Places like Denver, Austin, Chicago, and Miami are coming with a vengeance. Just this week, we saw Atlanta bring us another unicorn with Calendly. For those willing to look, those hidden gems really aren't so hidden. Our guests know this firsthand and have the portfolios to prove it. Funny thing is, the talent has always been there, but now more people are starting to take note. Charlie Munger once said, "Fish where the fish are." Where our panelists today are in lakes all their own, but it's starting to get more crowded. And with that, I'll kick it over to our moderator for this evening's conversation, Allie Felix.
I'm Allie Felix. Thank you so much, Mike, for that introduction. I'm really excited for our conversation tonight. I'm going to be guiding us through our discussion, and I am the VP of Platform for Embarc Collective. So I am based in Tampa Bay, Florida. I would love for those of you who are tuning in, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you're an entrepreneur, an investor, a future investor, a startup supporter, whoever you are, let us know so that we know who you are and how we can tailor the conversation to you tonight. And thank you so much for being here. As Mike said, you could be anywhere in the world and you're here with us, which is amazing. So I'm excited for the conversation because I myself have been a boomerang, right? I'm here based in Tampa Bay. I'm in the Southeast. I've spent time in San Francisco and New York, and I fully believe that high growth startups can start and scale anywhere. And the access to capital is a big piece of that. And that's really why we're here tonight. So Mike, I'll have you start bringing folks on stage so we can introduce our amazing lineup of panelists. And I'm really excited to kick off this conversation. And as you all pop up, I'm just going to have the intro start. Blake, you're first on my screen. We're going to do some rapid fire intros because we want to know who you are, but we also want to get to the good stuff. So if you would share your name, the firm that you're with, any focus areas that you really focus on. And I would love to do a little icebreaker so that we can get to know each other. And I think something fun to know would be kind of a catalyst or what brought you into the venture world or led you to be an investor. So Blake, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Okay, you can tell me which of those 3 or 4 questions I forget. So I'm Blake Patton, founder and managing partner at TechSquareVentures. We're an early stage venture firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. We invest in enterprise and marketplace technology companies. We invest out of 2 funds. We have our TechSquareVentures early stage venture fund. And then we also are the venture firm behind Engage, which is a collaborative corporate venture fund. I think the last question there is what got me into VC. A long story short, I spent most of my career doing what most of you are doing, building high growth technology companies, including was it IXL, which we took public in the .com days, and then a couple of other venture-backed companies, and wound up as the interim director of ATDC, which is Georgia Tech's startup incubator, because the person that was running it left, and I was asked to chair the search committee to find somebody, and that's really what pulled me in the startup community. Everything you guys said, I saw like you. I'd lived in other tech hubs, New York, Boston, and I was looking out my window and seeing these amazing companies here in Atlanta in the Southeast, and just wanted to jump in, and I saw this gap in access to capital, especially early stage capital, as both a need and opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we'll dive into that tonight. Eric, I'm going to kick it over to you. You're next on my screen.
Hello. Great to be here with my amazing panelists here in this audience. Thank you for spending time with us. So I'm Eric Bahn. I'm one of the co-founders of an early stage VC fund called Hustle Fund. I'm based here in the San Francisco Bay Area, but we also do a lot of work in Southeast Asia. So we have an office here and in Singapore. We're a generalist fund, so we like to focus on any founders who are building interesting software. So if we're software generalists and like to hear about B2B, consumer, digital health, fintech, a whole gamut of companies. And I think the reason why I got into VC was I spent 15 years as a founder. I never really enjoyed any VC that I met. It was just a weird kind of asymmetric relationship of power. I felt like I was begging for cash. And I can actually see how that was translated to abuse as well in certain times in my career. So we started this fund to build a different kind of social contract with founders that feels a little bit more balanced. I'm happy to talk about what that model looks like, but we want to be a team that you want to grow old with as you're looking for your first round of financing and want to prove our value to you over time. So that's us.
Thanks, Eric. Shyla, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Sure. So, hey, everyone, I'm Shila Nieves, Burney. I'm the founding and managing partner for Zane Venture Fund. We're focused on diverse entrepreneurs who are creating tech-enabled solutions primarily here in the Southeast, but opportunistically across the U.S. I got into venture because of an entrepreneur who asked me to source investors for him. And I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, never knew full-time entrepreneurship would be for me. And so when this entrepreneur asked me to source investors, I jumped right in. And Blake won't remember this, but I talked to you a long time ago about that deal. And
Remember, of course I remember.
Yeah, felt the bug, and then met a lot of entrepreneurs along the way. And to be very transparent, also saw the inequities within venture, and I decided I need to do something about this. And so as a problem solver, almost a year later, here I am with a fully fledged fund, and so really excited about the journey so far and the journey ahead.
It's awesome. Welcome, Shyla. And I see a theme here, and I think it's going to continue with Brian. So I'll let you introduce yourself to the crowd, Brian.
I'm just following her lead. That's all. Fran, Brackeen, a general partner of lightship.capital. We are a venture fund focused on the Midwest and the South. We call it the mighty middle. For the folks here, they'll all appreciate that. We feel like it's an area of the country that's underrepresented, both in founders, but also in geography. So that's how we mix our investment strategy. So we invest in women and people of color, also the LGBTQIA plus population, the disabled, in the middle of the country, and includes again the Midwest and South. It's our first fund. It's a $50 million fund, and I think that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I hope the crowd is excited because we have like a really stellar lineup of investors who have experience on both sides of the table, which I think is unique and exciting. So, Brian, you mentioned something about kind of this growing ecosystem in the middle. And I know that's really the frame of the conversation today. And I think all of us probably have seen the Twitter chatter that's going on. There's this tech exodus in San Francisco, in New York. People are coming to Miami and Austin, and all sorts of markets. So, I'm curious what brand narratives you've seen in these like rising markets that really resonate. Like, why are people actually moving? What gets people to move? I think like cost of living is often touted, but I don't think that's really the reason why. So I'm gonna start with you, Shyla, and Blake, actually, knowing that you're in Atlanta in the Southeast, I'm based in the Southeast, is kind of a leader in that regard. So I'd love to know what your take is on how Atlanta has done that and what's been really effective. And then the panel can jump in as well.
So I always say talent and innovation doesn't have a zip code, right? And so people always assume the best deals, the best talent was either in New York or on the West Coast. And I think what we're saying, Blake is really excited about. We saw 5 unicorns roll up. That doesn't tell you about sort of the talent in the Southeast, specifically Atlanta. I think this is sort of our moment, right? At one point when I started on this journey, there was people were like, "You don't have a big win in Atlanta." Well, we're so big, we came out with 5 at the same time, and there's so many more behind those folks. And I think as people start, and it's not about cost of living, right? People can go anywhere in the South, and it's actually kind of inexpensive compared to some of the cities they're coming from.
Yeah.
But it's more cost of living. It's a community here. We have talent coming out of universities, throughout the Southeast, not just Atlanta. And so I think because of some of the big wins we have now, and people see the story that we tell won't be as hard as it used to be, right? Because I started, I'm still fundraising, and people ask me like, how do you see all these, like where are all these deals? And I think after today's news, people will know there's lots of innovation here. And again, it doesn't have a zip code. It's all throughout the Southeast.
Yeah, look, I think a couple of things, and Shyla highlighted this, that the talent, right? Smart people want to go and work with other smart people, and what Atlanta and all the Southeast has going for it is that in spades. The other thing I think is the key ingredients, world-class research universities, large companies, right? The talent base, all of those things we have. But what I think is really happening is this. It's more than just the startup world now. It's about innovation broadly.
Yeah.
And so, large companies are very focused on innovation. Universities are focused on it, both to attract students and to increase commercialization. And so in Atlanta, I think we have kind of a unique, I tell people all the time, I don't think we could have launched Engage anywhere else but Atlanta. There's a sense of cooperation, but what's really happening is some of the things that happen organically in tech hubs like the West Coast, because their big companies are tech companies and the people know each other and they interact. And so there's this engagement that's starting to happen with non-tech companies. And so Atlanta, in our Engage, in our corporate, in our innovation program, the investors and the companies in that are companies like Delta and Home Depot and, Invesco and UPS and Cox and Enterprises. It's just a really diverse, all kinds of industries, but not traditional tech companies. But they are starting to act just like big tech companies in every way, looking for innovation outside their walls, looking to engage with early stage companies, looking to grow by, partnering or acquiring those companies. So I think you're seeing a bigger shift, which is about innovation, and then, certainly there's economic development things like taxes and stuff that have made some of those cities more attractive for the individuals that are making those decisions. But in general, I'm just excited about the talent. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I joke all the time that all of us .com kids are now in our 40s and 50s. And so what that has meant for the Southeast is for the first time, we have this real critical mass of entrepreneurs that have done it before and had experience and have known each other and worked with each other for years. And then I guess, and so, now that's all kind of coming together. And then the final ingredient, I think this year, as a nation, right, having to address, diversity and racial inequity. Half the nation's Black population lives in the Southeast. I mean, we have to be great at it, or we won't be a leading tech hub. And so I think that's going to be a real huge advantage for this region.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Blake, and kudos to you and Engage. I think the Fortune 500 model that you've really employed in Atlanta is setting the bar for a lot of us and a lot of the large corporations on how to not only invest in startups, but to partner with them, to buy from them. So I think that's awesome. Brian, I know that you and Lightship have kind of piloted these offices, these hubs within cities like Indianapolis and Detroit. And I really want to know from you why it was so important to be, not just in one location, but to have these kind of tentacles throughout the middle, as you call it. Why is that so important to you and to Lightship's thesis?
Yeah, I think one of the things we promise our LPs is that by focusing on certain geographies, you can go a little bit deeper, right? It can't just be, oh yeah, occasionally I see a deal from Chicago and that's nice. Like that's not good enough, right? You gotta be like in it. You have to live it. And so when you start to focus in the middle of the country, you start to realize that there are actually two Midwests. There's the Eastern Midwest and the Western Midwest. So if you went to school or grew up in Ohio, folks in Michigan, folks in Pennsylvania, like you may have went to university in Indiana, that's not uncommon. But rarely do those folks know people in Oklahoma. Even though both those places, you get an Uber and say, are we in the Midwest? Heck yeah, we are. This is the middle of the Midwest, right? Like each person really believes that that's the center right there. Kansas City, dead center, if you ask them. Cincinnati, dead center. Doesn't matter where you go. So if that's the case, it's important. We thought it was important for us to open hubs and open some office space in different cities for office hours, for meeting founders, for rolling up our sleeves and meeting people in certain places. The last thing there is some of these cities are just absolutely starved for capital. So you look at a place like Pittsburgh, we were talking about unicorns earlier in Atlanta, it was such a good success. Like Pittsburgh's very similar. Carnegie Mellon putting out a lot of great AI talent. They have something like 9 unicorns, but only 4 venture funds. It doesn't make any sense. If you had that reality in other cities, it would be obvious. But for some reason, because it's not, it's flyover country, we don't get our fair share.
Yeah, and it's important for the flywheel of our markets to have local investors invest in local companies that grow big. Eric, I'm curious, you're based in San Francisco, but Hustle Funds had this kind of global presence from the get-go, and you've invested in companies in all of these markets that we're talking about today. So tell us about that kind of thesis, and maybe if you think that you've had an edge over others going into 2020, the world goes remote, nobody's written a check on a Zoom call. Like, what was that experience like you, and how do you think you've been at an advantage from the get-go over this past year?
So we have a mantra at our fund that all of us have to believe in order to work at Hustle Fund, which is that great hustlers look like anyone and come from anywhere. And it's amazing because in the Bay Area, traditionally, institutionally within venture, that's not believed at all. So before the pandemic, there's a prevailing belief, I think, along with some of my colleagues in more established funds, that if you're not in the San Francisco Bay Area, how serious are you, right? And I'm someone that grew up in Detroit, and I still have a lot of network throughout the Midwest. And I always found that personally insulting, which is just like, well, I got a lot of friends who are hustling hard. They're in tech, they're not in tech, but they're working their asses off to build like big businesses and have big ambitions. So the notion that you can gatekeep people by geography never really made any sense. So if we expand that worldview a little bit more, Silicon Valley today has become a mindset more than a location. And in fact, when you look at the exodus that's happening in the Bay Area, these are folks who, spent 5 years, 10 years building careers, getting that kind of ethos of being good community members and, helpful. Some of the things I really love about living here and spreading it out into all these hubs across the United States, but also globally. Many folks are going home, right, to Singapore, Indonesia, other places around the world. So we want to have some flexibility within our fund to invest anywhere. And that's been a really important part of our thesis, is just be wherever you need to be. But if you're a strong founder and have access to talent and the ambition to build something really big, then let's be supportive of those kinds of founders. In terms of the second part of your question around, do we have an edge in terms of doing all of our checks on the phone or through Zoom? Maybe, but not with these group of peers. I mean, like the folks who are on the panel here, we're largely kind of this emerging manager class that's operating very differently from some more like older established kind of, models where, long gone are the days at this point of, let's get into a conference room on Monday, spend like 8 hours going through all the deals, invite in the founders, like press flesh and, see who these people are like. I mean, those models are just shifted. But frankly, this is some of the most backward part of the VC industry. So when I was a founder in 2005, I ran a full remote team. Back then, many of the folks on this panel that are running companies had pretty heavy remote presence as well. So it's not like any of this stuff is new. It's just that VCs weren't operating like this, right? So in some ways, the industry is catching up to what founders are doing already. And the notion of location, even back then in 2005, 15 years ago, is a little bit weird. I was like, well, most of my team is in Europe and Latin America. Am I a Bay Area company? I guess so, because I live here, right? For convenience sake, I'll just say that. Those kinds of geographic ties, I think, are weakening further. And that gets me so excited. Just because, when these ecosystems pop up and some of the best parts, I think, of the Silicon Valley ethos can be embedded in those regions. But more than that, some of the best qualities of those regions themselves also merge with those qualities. I think we should stop comparing ourselves to Silicon Valley. I think there should just be a Nashville culture, like an Atlanta culture, and they're all different, but super amazing in their own ways. It's such an incredible time to be doing what we do with these peers, right, to support these founders.
Yeah, I totally agree. We got to own our secret sauce in our respective markets. I want to talk, Eric, you're talking about how there's this new emerging fund of an emerging class of fund managers. And I know we have a lot of founders who are online. I've seen that come through the chat. So I want to be able to share some kind of tactical startup founder tips that they can implement in their businesses after this session. And I think the topic of choosing your investor and choosing the right person to align with is really important. So I'll throw it to the panel. Anyone can jump in, everyone can jump in. What advice, very specific tactical advice do you have for founders in choosing the right investor? How do you go about that? What are some key takeaways? And I'll throw it out so anyone can jump in.
I can take a crack, and I'd love to hear from my colleagues here too. So I've been married to my wife for 12 years, and we've been together for 18 years. And I remember when I proposed to her, I asked her this question. It was, do you want to grow old with me? Fortunately, she said yes. So this is actually kind of like, I know I'm going to start with a kind of a hand wavy comment here, but I think that's almost like one of the critical questions that you should be asking, not just your VC in the early days, but also any key partners like your co-founders and so forth, because that relationship is going to be something that lasts 7 to 10 years at least to get you from where you are today to your IPO or SPAC or acquisition to Google, whatever it's going to be. And it's a deeply intimate relationship where like all of your vulnerabilities and exposure is going to be there. So why invite even more stress to a stressful journey by taking on a jerk VC that provides a commodity, which is cash, that's important, but it's one that's sort of a grading kind of relationship that drips cortisol into your bloodstream every time you meet with that person for the next 7 to 10 years. Ultimately, that's going to shorten your lifespan, right? So I think that's kind of like the final test. Like if you're in a privileged position where you have cash and can select your investors, then I would say that, applying the final litmus test of just like who actually gives me both professional and emotional joy, that's going to support me along the way. Leading up to that, I think there's a whole variety of things you can do to try to FOMO investors to be in that position of privilege where you can choose to select your investors. But that's a bit of a longer conversation. I'd love to actually pass it to my colleagues if they have something else to add there.
I want to stick with the kind of family and the relationship comparison there. I often say to founders, think about the equity that you're selling as the investor you're selling it to is taking equity and money from your children, because that's exactly the case. Now, can they return that? Can they add enough value to make it worth it, to make that investment worth it, so that your kids have more in the end? Yes. But if you don't think they're going to do that, if you think that it's worth just selling equity so they can just put cash in and never talk to you again to the exit, and if you think that's more valuable than your children's future, and it really means that, like quite literally, then don't do it, right? I mean, that's how I like to frame it for founders.
Suggest is that founders have just as much an opportunity to research than we do with them. So for me, it's important to figure out like what type of investor you're looking for. Are you looking for hands-on, or are you looking for the check and I'll see you at exit? So I think that's really, really important. And for us, our approach is that we have a 360 approach. So we want to be here for you. We don't want to just write the check and walk away. And I'll give you an example. We have we have 2 companies, but some cohort companies. All of these companies are hiring right now. And so they came to us to help them look for talent. And so I think it's important to know what type of investor you do your research to figure out, is this somebody you want to spend the next 10 years with in this relationship, because it's just that it is definitely a relationship. And so do your research, go on Twitter, see how they engage there, see how they are on whatever social media platform. Personality is important, right? And when you're dealing with folks, I sometimes act like the ant to a lot of the folks who come to me. I'm going to give it to you straight. I'm not going to do all of that. So make sure that's something you really need to take on in an investor in me. I'm not going to hover over anybody and expect for you to come to me every time you have a problem, but I want to be here for you. And so just, clearly understand what type of investor you're looking for. And lastly, I will say there is this movement on entrepreneurs looking for diverse investors. And I'm not, I was on a call it was about a study that came out. A young woman said, I am a new one. She's a Black founder. Where can I find Black fund managers? So these young entrepreneurs are saying, I want my cap table to be diverse. And so we have to be ready for that sort of thing because they're asking deeper questions. Who else are you investing in? And so that's another thing that we need to keep in mind on the investor side of the table when we are approaching founders.
Yeah, I look, I think the panel covered it well. It's a marriage, except it really is until death do you part, or success do you part. But I think Brian's point that look for an investor, figure out what you need in addition to capital, and look for an investor that can help you. But what I would add to those two things are look for alignment. And to me, what that means is that there's alignment around the vision and that you have the same definition of success. I think that's an important and overlooked. That's usually where problems come down the road. And to Shyla's point, I think you can use that that dynamic. The best intros to us are through other entrepreneurs, and so other entrepreneurs we've worked with. That helps do what she said, do your homework, but it also helps you as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are our customers. So if a customer asks us to meet with somebody, we do. And that's a good way for you to get on people's radar screens, is find people they've worked with that in your network and get them to help make that introduction.
Blake, I'm going to throw it back to you quickly. I want to know if there are any, post-close, post-investment, are there any avoidable mistakes? Are there any mistakes that you see founders do? Or is there like a best practice of what happens next?
Yeah, gosh, that list would take up the rest of the session. But here's the best advice I can give you as an entrepreneur is I think a pretty common theme is, right after they've raised the money, they start to think about, I get asked a lot as an investor, where do we need to be? If they raise a seed round, where do we need to be to raise our Series A? What are those metrics? How much does our revenue have to be? And so they start to design their milestones around fundraising instead of the other way around. Instead of at the end of the day, your kind of key milestones, what actually changes the value, what grows value in the company. So those are different things depending on the stage you're at, but that's where the value of the company changes. And you make sure you design your milestones around that. And if you demonstrate that, and you demonstrate momentum, and you're telling that story as you go, and they see that progress, you'll raise that round. There's no one answer to what does my revenue have to be. It's much more about what does that risk does that represent? Basically, the value of your company goes up as you reduce the risk, right? And so these milestones aren't just what did you do and how much work did you do. It's when is that evidence visible to those investors, to that outside market. So I would say, instead of thinking about the milestones for the next fundraising round, think about the milestones that are about, reducing the risk, demonstrating the potential for success, and growing the value of the company. And if you do that, the money will be there.
I love that. I have a lot of founders who need to hear that. I'm going to write that one down. I think that's good perspective. Shyla, I know that Zane has established these partnerships with Brown University, in particular Access U, it's called, and it's really to support diverse founders. And I know that's a core mission to Zane. So can you speak a little bit to what that looks like and how that's, creating a more equitable founder future for all of us?
So let me start with how it began. So I was at Georgia Tech. I was speaking to a panel, to a student organization, and when it was over, they all rushed to me and was like, wanted to know more about Zane Venture Fund. They were young entrepreneurs, and was they explained to me that Georgia Tech has these amazing programs, but they're very they're limited seating and they're very competitive, right? And so 400 students applied. I think 40 got in. My mind went to what happened to the other 360. And so I began to start doing some research, and I found that there is so much talent at the university level, but there's limited programming. And so we're not trying to replicate programming. We're trying to bridge and work with universities around talent. And so that led to Access University. We thought we can get earlier in the pipeline now and see what deals are available that nobody's maybe paying attention to because these folks are still university students or student entrepreneurs. And so we decided to partner with Brown University as our first school. We had students from Georgia Tech, Georgia State, like the entire Southeast, and some students from other schools to come and talk about their experience as a student entrepreneur. but we also went a little bit deeper. There are students who are thinking about venture capital now. And so some of these universities have investment clubs where they're actually, investing into entrepreneurs. And so we thought here is another, not only a differentiator, but an opportunity to get into the pipeline early. And I've already gotten companies from Georgia Tech and Georgia State, like, hey, y'all need to look at these folks. And so I think it makes for a great partnership. We have a great university system here, not only your traditional PWIs, but also HBCUs with great talent. And so I don't want to lose that. That's talent that we can get into, not either our programming, or we can make an early investment in. And so I think it's just the university talent is ripe for those who are looking to get into the pipeline earlier.
I'm going to throw it to Brian on that note, because I think there is something to be said about companies finding these companies, finding the talent, and having opportunities for the talent to either come back to their home market as a boomerang or to stay local and work within the startups there. So Brian, I'm curious if you have any stories or anecdotes from the founders that you've worked with, or maybe your own founder experience on attracting talent. It's like a key component to being an early stage company, and harvesting that talent locally, finding talent to bring back. What does that look like? And what are some strategies that the founders here today can take away?
Yeah, I mean, talent, to your point, to the point of the question, is absolutely critical. I mean, like everything, like in every industry and everything that we do. I suspect, and I'm happy to be wrong, but I suspect the folks here in the panel would tell you there's a challenge in the Valley that has been projected onto us and other places about how hard it is to find some of these very, very talented folks. I often say there's like two ponds, right? There's like a Silicon Valley pond where there's 5 good fish and there's hundreds of people standing around this pond, shoulder to shoulder, rods in the water, right? And then the rest of us, like you guys are like, hey, like Atlanta, like there's like all these amazing fish, right? And so it's more about kind of sorting. There are deals that these guys are going to turn down that are perfectly fine, that are perfectly investable, that they would actually tell other people that are good. And you don't always hear that in some of the other geographies. So I think for us, it's like not just bringing talent, it's actually just sorting through 1 and 1As to figure out, who's best, right? And who can we help the most? I think Blake made a good point about that. Like, where's the alignment, right? And so you hear non-coastal investors talking about things like alignment, and you hear coastal investors talking about things like unicorn, and have to like claw my way into a deal, right? And so I think it's a subtle difference, but I think it's worthy of calling out.
Yeah, Eric, I'm going to throw it to you next. And on this topic of talent and supporting the company and creating alignment at the early stage, I know Hustle Fund really rolls up their sleeves and kind of jumps on board with that company. Can you speak to any of the early challenges of the startups that you're working with, and like the key blockers that you are supporting with that maybe the companies here can watch out for or learn from that you really work to support in those early days?
Sure. I'll pick one. So I think it's measurement. A really hard thing for a founder to think about in the early days when everything's so chaotic at the pre-seed, just like the right at the company formation phase of your company, is what should we measure and why? What is our key metric? And it's going to change a lot. Later on, maybe it's things like revenue, retention, some of the kind of accounting kind of methods that, or accounting metrics that, Series B, C investors are really going to pay attention to. But you're going to be running really hard towards something. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit less obvious, like code commits, or like what did we ship this week, or number of experiments run, or customer development calls. So the first question that we ask when we start engaging with a founder is like, what do you think the most important metric is that you want to measure, and why? And then I think as a corollary to that is like, how are you going to measure it? And that's where it starts to get very interesting, because it turns out that instrumentation is more tricky than you can imagine. If it's things like a number of experiments that we're running, figuring out how to build a dashboard like that actually exposes that these experiments are being run, like what are the results, like are they actually pushing us in the right direction as a business? Those sound pretty easy at a high level, but in practice it's very, very difficult to figure out how to instrument, dashboard, and then figure out whether it's actually the correct metric, because oftentimes you got to do a little bit of experimenting to see whether it's the right thing to focus on. So what I like to describe the seed stage to founders is using like high school chemistry terms. I remember reading about this concept called entropy, right? So it's like, to me, like complete randomness, lack of structure. And what you're trying to do in your seed stage is try to bring entropy to structure, right? Structure to me is like, you're on the path to product market fit. There's repeatability. There's like a way to actually grow this into a large going concern. And it's going to be really messy, but one way to sort of pierce through entropy is measurement.
Yes to that. That's awesome. I want to pause quickly and just shout out to the audience who's here. If you have questions, please throw them in the chat. I want to leave lots of time to get everything that you have on your mind answered. So please put them in the chat box and we'll definitely get to them. But as we kind of segue into that, I know it's a pretty incredible lineup of panelists we have here in terms of kind of these emerging fund managers who are setting kind of a new conversation, opening up possibilities and pathways. And I think this has become a really hot topic as of late. And I know that I would love to learn from all of you. So I want to know a little bit about what that, like, why am I, like, why do you need to create a fund? Obviously you have different theses, but I think there's this, right now we're in a time where people are launching funds all over the place. So like, why create a fund? Why does that create impact on your specific community? Why is that so important? And I'll throw that to anybody, because I think, you know, we're all in our own markets and we're seeing these micro funds emerge, and why is that important?
We had an accelerator before, and we actually are moving to just more like foundation work from acceleration. One, because to your point, the accelerators are popping up all over, and they have different levels of success. And two, we felt we could teach people strategy all day long, but if they didn't have the funds necessary to execute that strategy, then what good is that? Eric just talked about experimentation and great. Like if you're going to look at run ads and you don't have any money to run the ad, you could set up the experiment all day, right? But you have to at some point put the credit card in and run the ad, run the A/B test, and you name it. And so we thought it's because capital is a challenge, and because something like 0.2% of like all Black women have raised venture funds in the last year or so. It was obvious that we need to be part of the solution. And because the problem is so great, the impact is actually also great. So if after we deploy this full $50 million, we could literally increase that by twice as much, right? Which is ridiculous. But like, it's true. You can actually literally double the number of Black women who get funding with a single fund. It's both sad and exciting, right? So that's why we did it on our side.
I actually want to throw it to Blake, because you talked about Accelerator, and there are lots of accelerators that have popped up. And Blake, you are with Engage as well. And I think that that's actually a very specific strategy that Engage has employed. So can you talk about, for those who might want to set up an accelerator or build that, how, like, why was Engage the right one, and how do you identify like what the need is and how to serve it?
Yeah, I think the answer ties to your last question. So, you know, we have both sides. We have a traditional venture fund, and then we have this program, which includes an accelerator program. But like I said, we didn't think of it as an accelerator, as an innovation platform. We thought about bringing big companies and startups together. And what we recognized was that to do that well, you know, we had to do it programmatically. So I think the kind of to your first answer, what I think is when I started TechSquareVentures, what I learned very early on, like I said earlier, is what these entrepreneurs need more than capital is actually access to customers and markets. And so we were trying to figure out how can we do that. And so and then as we talked to the big companies, you know, they clearly wanted access to this innovation, and they needed help sort of curating and navigating and understanding what was going on out there and matching it to their needs. And then we had, you know, Georgia Tech as a partner. So I think I'd say a couple things. Number one is make sure you're solving what is the actual value proposition? What's the real need? Make sure you're really solving something for customers that's needed. A lot of the need for Startup 101 is now readily available, even in, secondary markets. There's accelerators, there's co-working spaces, there's mentorship programs, there's all sorts of things. So what is your accelerator going to solve for those customers and the stakeholders of that? And then second, I would, I think we built something that was sort of first of its kind. We definitely want to be the best, right? We're representing the best and largest corporate brands, and so we need to be the best at it. And so I think the real key comes down to the same thing you would tell a startup, right? What is that value proposition that you're going to deliver to those stakeholders? It's, when people think of it just to sort of, write checks, that's not really the need. And so, in our region, there was a lot of access to capital for your first couple 100,000. And then once you got to a couple million in revenue, there was plenty of access to capital, including from outside our region. But there was this giant valley in the middle. And so that was only one problem, though. I think Brian or Eric said it well. All the money in the world doesn't necessarily solve that. You still have to have the right strategy, and you have to get to the customer. So what we did is we built a platform to say, we're going to help you figure out your go-to-market strategy. And then we've got a bunch of partners to help you put it into action. So since we've launched the Engage program, we've had, my team will get mad because I'm sure I'm going to get the number too low, but I think we've had 86 contracts between, our corporate partners and those startups. So it's working. It's working. And we have, just to kind of put a bow on that of how important it is to these companies, the CEOs of all these large companies, these are the world's largest companies. They're leaders in their industries, serve on a board with us, right? And I don't know where else in the country, periodically you get together, 10 or 11 CEOs of the largest companies to talk about how to engage with the innovation, with the startup ecosystem. So it's a powerful platform and a powerful commitment. And so I think what we did right is we did something that others weren't. All that startup education kind of ends at product market fit, and we picked up at go to market. And then number two, we pulled together, absolute world-class partners to really deliver on that promise.
Yeah, such a good insight. The best kind of capital revenue, I like to say. Shyla, I know that you now are 2 portfolio companies, Steve. You've made 2 investments, is that right?
We have.
Okay, so congrats. That's huge.
Really, definitely proud about it, but I want to pick back before I talk about them first. So
yeah.
The one to your question about why start a fund, right? And so for me, when I started on this journey, there was only one person who looked like me that I could find, and that was Arlen Hamilton at Backstage Capital. There was nothing like that here in the Southeast. And while several of us have come up right there, I think 3 or 4 of us who are now currently raising fund, there was just a fund. There was just Arlen. And so, and maybe there were others that I didn't know about, but she's the only one that came up on my radar. And I was just like, well, the Southeast shouldn't always have to go west. Why can't we fund those companies here? And so that was part of the reason why I got in. And I started in New York. I started doing EATS in New York, and I found even New York didn't have as much. I'm talking about diverse entrepreneurs, right? So they didn't have access to capital, access to networks. And when I started paying attention to my own region, I was like dumbfounded. And so that's why I started a fund. And so, but I think if all of us get funded, there's still enough capital to want people to think that there's sort of a scarcity going around, like there's not enough capital to fund. All of us can be funded. But back to our portfolio companies. So excited about both of these companies because the difference in how we invested in them, right? One, we had spent almost a year with. She came out of TechSquare Lab. She had won Startup Battle. I met her, liked her. Sig Mosley is my venture partner, and him and I work closely together as almost partners. And Sig wasn't really interested in that particular company. She's hardware, but now she pivoted and went to software during COVID and became like a very, very great opportunity for us. But guess what? We weren't ready yet to write checks. So in the spirit of community here in the Southeast, I sent her over to Outlander Labs, who quickly wrote a check for her, and then went on getting her invested by other folks here in the region. And so and then we got in at the very last minute because we got FOBO for our own, company we had been working with, so we made that investment. The second one was one that is based here in Atlanta, spun out of MailChimp, got the MailChimp to write him his first check and the MailChimp CTO. And we're going, now he has his own company. How can we miss out on that? To be able to get somebody that you previously worked for, he had found a pain point within MailChimp and then decided to create his own company. We spent our time because we were so excited, and we wrote a check. The round was led by Harlem Capital, so that made it a little bit, they had done their due diligence. So we did ours, and we wrote a check within about 3 weeks. And so two different ways in which we look at companies. One, we needed to work with a little bit, but didn't want to knock her off our radar because we thought she did have. The other one fit squarely into our thesis, and just the way he came to us, which was by another entrepreneur who it's Calendly, from Calendly reached out to me and said, hey, this is an entrepreneur. I think you should take a look at him. He's looking for diverse fund managers to fill his round. How great that you get an opportunity from another entrepreneur and say, hey, take a look. And so that's how we got those two investments, and really, really excited about both of them.
Well, kudos to you, Shyla. That's really awesome. And we'll all be following along with your journey. I see a question from Alexandria in the chat. What is the right timing for seeking investment? Eric, I don't know if you want to take that or anyone else, but I think it's a good question. What's the right time? When?
Well, thank you for that question, Alexandria. So the first question I'll ask back is need outside investing. I think there's a whole slew of questions I would ask before venture investing in particular, or maybe even angel investing, which is, can you bootstrap this? My first company was bootstrapped out of necessity because no one wanted to fund it. It ended up being great because I was in control of my own destiny, my own timing, how fast I wanted to grow the business. And then I owned all of it by the time we got acquired. So that's awesome. If you could do that, that's way better. So that's part one. Part two is, are there other sources of funding that you can access outside of venture to unblock you? So this is probably more true for businesses that are a little bit further along, but there's great resources like revenue-based financing, Clearbank, Earnest Capital, Lighter Capital. Even Hustle Fund has an RBF fund, revenue-based financing fund called Flywheel. So these are non-dilutive sources of capital. And if you're in businesses where, let's say, cost per acquisition is very consistent, it's like, I run this great mug company. It costs me $1 on Facebook to acquire a new customer that pays me $10, and it's repeatable. And all I need is $1 million to just pump in to get the sales. And you have the evidence that you can do it. Then why raise equity and sell $1 million of your own equity when you could just get non-dilutive sources of capital from a bank or from a revenue-based finance lender to fund that growth, right? Not every business fits in that kind of category. I think my take in terms of when the right timing for investment is just you have a very convincing story as to why you need the money now and why this is the right kind of form of capital to take. So if you're operating in a market that requires really rapid expansion because of the competitiveness, or just the opportunity window is really small for you to enter, you have really clear reasons about this very specific amount of money that you want to raise to unblock on things like team, go-to-market strategy, and elsewhere. If those things just really align and you're just really committed to the path of something that's more venture backable and that kind of exponential growth that comes with it, then I think that is the right time. For us, our most common investor is mom and dad and uncle and aunt, right? Or some of the early angels that come along as an institutional fund, our strategy is to try to come alongside those folks. I think for our panelists here, many of them write checks at level 2. But if you have a really strong case that sort of satisfies some of those conditions, then that could be the right thing. But again, VC in particular, I think is a funding source of last resort. It's not the friendliest capital you can find. There's other kinds of non-dilutive sources out there that you got to explore first.
Yes. I love that. I have another question from the group from Abdullah, who said, what extent should an entrepreneur pivot their business into a field where they see a huge market opportunity? So not my zone of expertise, but I see the market opportunity. I want to capitalize on that. Yes or no? Anyone can take the floor.
Just like Randy, it's a no from me, dog. I mean, you could pour yourself into becoming an expert. And then when you do become an expert, and I mean, that can happen. I remember deciding I was gonna learn about crypto and spent 3 weeks not sleeping, just reading everything I could. And I wouldn't say I was an expert, but I definitely became well informed. And I mean, like barely eating, like just reading. It's possible. That's possible. But the idea that it's hard to find solutions for industries that we don't know very much about. So either educate yourself in that area and become an expert, or I wouldn't suggest it. Or you could, one more thing, you could do a lot of iteration, basically start with the wrong premise and then just kind of highly, quickly, and efficiently iterate to the next thing. Some people are really good at that, but this is unlikely.
Yeah, I think what I'd add to that is if customers are pulling you in that direction, right, and it fits, the roadmap. I mean, there's pivots because what you're doing is not working, and you're just looking for something, and that's a different story. As an investor, right, I don't have a lot of evidence that those turn out to win in the long run, but we definitely have a lot of companies that start out with a hypothesis. They're running a set of experiments in their early go-to-market, and they find out, they define the target customer wrong, or there's another customer base that has, a bigger use or a different use, that's tangential. And so I don't know if you call those pivots or not, but those little pivots, I think that is what finding product market fit means, right? And so, yeah, I think it's about, as the entrepreneur, right, hey, going and chasing an opportunity in left field because you think something, but no one there, yeah, definitely press the pause button and figure out why you're even thinking that.
We have just a few minutes left. So I think for a closing rapid fire round, I'd love to know from each of you, is there a trend or an industry or subsector that you're really interested in right now, that you're digging in on right now, or maybe a company that you've recently funded in this space? So if you each want to go, I'd love to hear from you. And Blake, you're first on my screen, so I'll kick it to you.
So we spend a lot of time with those corporate partners, and that winds up driving what we source, both on the engaged side and our early stage fund, which we write bigger checks and tend to lead deals. Those are more the $500,000 to $3 million checks. So we already had a certain set of themes that we were focused on, designed by that. But one that really rose to the top and changed a lot around COVID and everything was the shift focus on supply chain, from sort of cost and optimization to resiliency and visibility. And so we've been doing a lot of digging and work on that. I guess the second half of the question in terms of deals, we're just launched our second fund, and we've done 3 deals out of that so far. One of them was we spent some time looking at the building materials marketplaces because we work with Georgia Pacific, and that led us to a company called Yesler. Another one was in the DevOps space, a testing environment for distributed computing environments, which we had a lot of experience in from some earlier investments. And then a third one that's kind of in stealth mode, but it's in the robotics space. So our themes tend to evolve based on what we're learning and seeing through the eyes of our corporate partners. And I guess I'll just close with, as investors in early stage, you're betting on people and you're betting on a market opportunity. And the market opportunity, generally, you can get smart on. What's hard is to figure out the timing. We're not all sitting around trying to figure out if autonomous vehicles are part of our future. It's part of our future. We just don't know how we're going to get from right now to there. And so that's why we love this. That's why we love working through the eyes of these large corporations, because they give us really unique insight into the market dynamics that help us figure out timing.
Awesome. We got 30 seconds rapid fire, everybody else. Eric.
I'll try to keep mine brief, but I think travel is interesting. So when I was looking at the Airbnb history from 2020, there was a moment early in the first or second quarter where people thought that the company was going to be in big trouble, and they had to take these kind of crazy terms from some lenders and so forth with strange warrants, but it bounced back. And actually occupancy tended to be really good towards the end of 2020. My take on this is that people can take working in their garage with 2 kids who they were coming in and out, by the way, this entire time for so long, right? You just have to get the heck out of your house. And once we can get vaccinated and hopefully there's some sort of level of herd immunity, and let's control for the idea that maybe variants aren't going to be too crazy in COVID. If we can get to a world where we get past this thing, I think that kind of repression is going to be manifest, and people just want to go back out into the world, see people, give hugs, meet new people in different regions. I don't know anything about the timing of when this is going to happen, but that's just my take.
Totally. Shyla,
So
please.
real quick, fintech, supply chain, cybersecurity, digital health, and ed tech. Those are the things that we're looking at, and those are booming markets here in the Southeast. So
Yes. Awesome. Well, I know we are just at time. Brian says CPG, AI, e-commerce, health, and sustainability. He had to run to his Twitch pitch. He's hosting an event. Plug for him. Check him out there. Blake, Shyla, Eric, I really just wanted to give you all such kudos. Thank you for spending your time with us, telling your experiences. And thank you so much to Mike and Startup Birmingham for putting this together. It was really awesome. I learned a lot. I hope you all did too. And shameless self-plug, how can we follow you, find out about you moving forward?
Nieves, Burney on all platforms, or Zane platforms.
Blake at TechSquareVentures.com is the email, and at Blake Patton, Twitter, and then our website's Tech. We're not hard to find.
Put my contact information on the chat, Eric, at Eric Bahn, and we're at hustlefund.vc.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And